Luke 9, and I've titled this, I Surrender Almost All. Probably one of the most honest titles I've had in a while. I surrender almost all. Anybody disagree with that? Anybody ever here fully surrender? I hope so, but fully surrendered, there's not a thing in your life that's ever tripping you up? Well, we're going to be real today. The main thought is salvation is free, but discipleship is expensive. It's costly. We're going to look at counting the cost in just these half a dozen verses here in just a few minutes. But you ever been watching a sporting event and you make the comment, man, I could do better than that. You stink. You don't have to raise your hand, but we've all been there, right? It's easy for us to say when we're lounging in our recliners or whatever, watching the professional athletes who many of them have earned the right to be there through a lot of training and investment of time and sweat and years, all of those things. In fact, they say some NFL players put in 10 to 12 hours between trainings and meetings every day, 6 days a week during the season, and about half that during the off season to stay in shape and to keep their training. Anybody want to commit to that? I'm not willing to commit to that. Plus, I'm not built like a football player. But spiritually speaking, we are called to be committed. How would it look like if we were on the field or the court, the actual field or the court? Well, we might feel out of place. But when you think about it spiritually, we're not supposed to be on the sidelines just cheering for Jesus and say, great play, Jesus, wonderful. We're so proud of you. We're to be right there serving Him, right on the field, right on the court, where the rubber meets the road. He doesn't call us to be armchair quarterbacks as disciples. We're to be involved, engaged. There will be challenges. I'm not going to paint the rosiest picture. We're going to have a lot of negative things, but we're also going to hit it with a positive at the end. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be costs. There's going to be sacrifice. It won't always be easy. You all agree? Shake your head. Yeah. But we are called to follow. We are called to surrender all. You've heard the hymn, I'm sure. I surrender all. And sometimes we sing it, I surrender some. Or I surrender most. But the hymn writer said, I surrender all. That's the message they were trying to communicate. I want to start by identifying what a disciple really is. Just the definition here. A student or adherent to a teacher, or a committed follower. That's what a disciple is. We can understand it as someone who's like an apprentice, maybe an intern. And what they do is they shadow the professional in order to learn that trade, to learn that skill, to where they can do the same thing and they can pass that along. And they can learn it and they can pass that along. Disciples make disciples. It's multiplication, right? We always think in terms of addition. It's multiplication. There were disciples, the followers of Jesus in general, which we are called to be. And then there were the 12 apostles. But they were also disciples because they walked alongside Jesus, and in His brief ministry on earth, they were right there shadowing Him so that they could learn all they could, so that when He left, they could continue spreading that message and continue the mission that He had left for them. That mission hasn't ended, has it? No, that mission goes on and on and on through us. And we should feel honored to be part of that. And we should be certainly committed to that. There's something very significant here. I don't want to read anything into this, but I'm all about, if I can speculate maybe and study something and get an idea of an application. I'm not saying it's gospel truth, but it's something that I take away from it. But I thought something was kind of interesting here, how this chapter 9, starts out with Jesus sending out the 12, to do all these wonderful things in His name. The next chapter, and I know there weren't chapter titles or chapter divisions and verses back in the day this was written, but there was definitely a distinction of thought there. And the next chapter 10, starts with Him sending 70 more out. So I'm doing math, which it's not my strong suit. That's why we have calculators on our phones. But I was like, that's 82. 12 plus 70 more. That's like 6.83 times more. There's something to that. Multiplication. And now I say these guys were committed followers because after Jesus shared over and over the cost of following Him and what that looks like and how expensive that can be at times and how uncomfortable it could be, there were still many willing to follow Him. Now we know at other parts there were some that just didn't follow any longer because they couldn't handle that. Right? They couldn't commit to it. many were willing to go out and do what he called them to do, as challenging as they knew it would be. And so that's why we have to know. We can't have this make-believe Disneyland version that I know Jesus, so everything's going to just be perfect. Because if you frown at Disney, you get fired, I think. I don't know. You might want to fact-check me on that. But that one lady didn't get fired, and she had that was many years ago. We won't go there. The Lord knows. But our story takes place in the in-between. Jesus had just predicted his death, and he had his face set toward Jerusalem. Now, what Luke is recording now is not the final walk to Jerusalem for him to be crucified and shed his blood on the cross, but this was the part where he would go into Judea, with Jerusalem being the capital, and begin his ministry there. And so that's where Luke picks up the scene in this case. But Jesus never lost sight of why he came, and we see it in verse 56, which is the verse immediately before our text that we're going to read here shortly. What did he come to do? Not to destroy men's lives, but to save. He came to save. He and his disciples had just traveled through a village in Samaria, but the Samaritans didn't accept them. Well, there's a lot of animosity in between there, but they saw that they were Jews traveling through, headed to the feasts in Jerusalem, and they wanted nothing to do with them. And so they continued. Jesus and his followers continued on toward another village. Before we pick up in our text, I want you to notice something. This is one of Luke's rule of threes. Okay, Luke's rule of threes. He mentions 3 examples. I think he does that because I need to hear it at least 3 times. I'm probably not going to pick up what he's putting down. I need repetition. The most well-known rule of 3 I can think of is in Luke chapter 15. The lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son. We think of that. He uses this triplet kind of application here for us. And we get it. We get it. We kind of get the coin, we kind of get the sheep, but when we get to the lost son, boom. We've either been the prodigal or know the prodigal, and that hits home. And his point gets into our lives. I want to look at these 3 individuals. First of all, this guy was interested in following. He was interested in following. Let's pick up in verse 57 of Luke chapter 9. Now it happened as they journeyed on the road that someone said to him, "Lord, I will follow you wherever you go." Wow. That's powerful. And Jesus was like, Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Now, Luke is assuming we understand how the rabbis and their disciples worked. They would go and live with them. They would be like a live-in disciple. And Jesus is like, can't do that. Don't have a house right here. He was itinerant, right? He would travel around and stay with friends and family along the way wherever he went. So this guy, he's dealing with disappointment. What do you mean? You don't have this big camp for us all to go? The Disciple Makers Club? No. He dealt with the disappointment. Tony Evans put it this way: God's goal is not merely your salvation, but your discipleship. He doesn't want you to just show up for church on Sunday. He wants you to be a visible, verbal follower of Jesus Christ every day of the week. And to that I say, amen. Following Jesus is a lifestyle, not just a get-out-of-hell-free card. Right? There's a commitment that comes along with following him. He saves us for a purpose, not just to sit around and criticize everybody else from our easy chairs. He calls us to be on the field for him. So we don't know what prompted this first individual in this account to approach Jesus, but he did. He approached Jesus as he and the disciples were walking. And he said, "Lord, I will follow you wherever you go." Perhaps there's I'm assuming there's additional dialogue going on here that we don't have recorded. There's more to this conversation. But Jesus' response had something to do with the fact that this was not a one-day excursion for tourists. It's not a sightseeing tour. No, in fact, it was a lifelong journey of service, which would often be difficult. Please get this. There will be no 5-star accommodations. And if somebody's preaching you that gospel where everything is 5-star accommodations, check it by the word, because it probably doesn't exist. This would-be follower didn't know what he was actually saying. Wherever you go, that's a pretty general statement. It's a brave statement. It's a bold statement. I was trying to think of all the words I could muster up to think of what this guy was saying. I put a note here, perhaps Africa. Well, for us, that'd be a long way. For this guy, maybe not so far, if you look at the geography of it. But you ever said that, Lord, I'll go anywhere except for Africa? Don't say that to God, because he does have a sense of humor. Okay, so Africa sounds like a pretty good pick. Do you remember what Peter said in Matthew 26:35? After Jesus had predicted his denial of him 3 times, Peter said, even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. False statement. He did 3 times to be exact. And the other disciples were like, we agree with Peter. Yep, right on, Peter. And Jesus is like, just wait. You'll see how this happens. So this first guy, he's likely going along with the impressive miracles, as many were, following Jesus for the miracles. Hey, why not? This guy is like, makes David Copperfield look like, child's play at a cheap birthday party. But he was doing all these things, but they didn't fully understand the terms of discipleship. They didn't really truly understand what it meant. This is a fact here, you cannot put conditions on God. We can't tell God to adapt to our wants and our desires. We often say, God, I'll follow you if you do this or that or the other. Wait, who's the master? Not us. We're not qualified to be the master. Nope. Our commitment has to be absolute, not fickle. It has to be absolute. The fact that Jesus never had a home address tells us he doesn't call us to prioritize life's comforts. There's nothing wrong with those things, but that's not where the focus ought to be. There will be hard times, right? There will be much sacrifice, but there will also be a peace and contentment that cannot be found in the world's goods or the world system. A lot of traveling acts have a tour bus. I love buses. I've always loved buses. I tried to convince my wife when we were young in our marriage 20-some years ago that we should get a bus and live on it. And she's like, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. Then as we've progressed, she's like, that would be kind of cool, wouldn't it? I'm like, however, we could have 10 of our mortgage for one of those buses if you think about it, because they're not cheap. The average new conversion coach averages somewhere around the $2 million mark. And that's why a lot of artists, they lease their buses and they use them while they go on tour, because, who can afford that? 2026 Royal Blue Prevost XL with quad slide outs. I mean, just a little specific there. But Jesus didn't offer his followers that. He's like, nope, we're walking. We're walking. Go grab a mule. He didn't have all those things to give them. And I think, well, put it in their context, whatever that might have been, maybe because the accommodations would have gotten ahead of him. Maybe the accommodations would have been something that took the focus, or a distraction or an idol for them. You don't know, maybe. You ever seen an advertisement for something in the paper and it says, serious inquiries only? That's what he's saying. Come on, get serious about this. There's a lot of interested people. They're very interested. But when they try to do this through their terms and they follow, quote unquote, Jesus on there's a lot of disappointment. It doesn't work on our terms. We're not qualified to set the terms. Why? Because many people don't want to surrender. Let's look at the second guy. Verses 59 and 60. Then Jesus said to another, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God. This guy dealt with delay. He's invited by Jesus to follow. He doesn't say no. What does he say? He says what my kids say all the time. Hold on. Go do this. Hang on. He's thinking about it. But there's some other things he'd like to accomplish first. There's some other things he'd like to do before he follows Jesus. No, following Jesus must be our first priority. He's going to take care of the other details. He'll take care of the important stuff. We just have to be willing to go. Like the fishermen, drop your nets and go. Just go. He'll take care of that. I never read anything in the Gospels where Peter and James, they're like, I don't know. Let's look. Let's see what the terms and conditions are. Am I going to have 3 squares a day? Am I going to have accommodation? No, they left it all and they followed. If you look at the call of Matthew or Levi, and he left all and followed Jesus. And that's what we are called to do as well. Let's put this guy's response in perspective, okay? If his father had just died, he probably wouldn't have run into Jesus that day, because the Jewish custom was to bury them within 24 hours. So that means his dad probably wasn't even dead. But he's saying, Lord, I'll come after my father dies, which that sounds like a really, really great suggestion or request there, right? After he dies, then I'll follow you. If his father really had just died, he would be at the funeral. He'd be with his family. He'd be consoling them. So let's be honest. The guy's father probably wasn't dead. He probably wasn't sick. He could have lived another 30 years, because that's how our delay works. I'll follow you, Lord. I'll get to it eventually. And Jesus, he's like, However, he said that in his own language. That's how it sounds like to me. Doesn't work like that. Let the spiritually dead bury their dead, but you go and spread God's message. This guy was not kingdom-minded. He did not have the interests of the Lord in mind at all. You've probably heard the name Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German pastor and a theologian, and he opposed the Nazi regime and the socialism. In 1939, he published a book called The Cost of Discipleship. Not too many years later, in 1945, he was executed for his bold stand. He didn't say, hang on, let's see how this book thing does here. Let's see how my book tour goes, and then we'll talk about this. And we're too ashamed to identify with Christ right here, where it's relatively safe and accepted. And we're just like, nah. Bonhoeffer didn't make any excuses or delay his obedience. When Jesus says, follow me, he means now. Don't put it off. Then we see the third guy. He was interrupted from following. Verses 61 and 62. And another also said, Lord, I will follow you, but. Here we are. I will follow you, but. Let me first go and bid them farewell who are at my house. But Jesus said, no one, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Write that on your list of things you never want to hear Jesus say. And this guy heard it right from the mouth of Jesus. He's like, all right, I'll talk to the younger crowd. He's like, BRB. You know what that means, right? I see some not so younger people shaking their heads. Be right back, Jesus. This guy dealt with distractions. So we saw disappointment, we saw delay, we saw distractions. There's a lot more implied here, I believe, than what was said. There may have even been a farewell party that would have had to take place. If this guy went back to his family and said, look, I'm going to go follow Jesus for an indefinite amount of time, bye, that wouldn't be enough, right? No, those people knew how to celebrate. All right, let's get the feast going. Let's call all our friends and our neighbors and our family and everyone, and we're going to spend the next couple weeks saying goodbye to you. During that time, this individual's fervor to follow could have worn off. He could have changed his mind and stayed at home where things are comfortable, where his family was, where the surroundings were familiar. He could have done these things. And I'm just thinking of the way I would do this. That's probably how I would respond. But Jesus calls us to focus completely on him. No turning back. You know the old hymn, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. Well, you might be like, hey, I'm a theologian, Pastor John, and what about Elisha? How does he fit into this? Elisha, didn't he go back to his family and bid them farewell before he followed Elijah? Okay. But you're not going to stump me on this one because I went through the Bible and I read it, okay? 1 Kings 19:21 says, so Elisha left him, Elijah, and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. The difference here is what? He just burned all his security, his livelihood. They just ate it. He's like, well, that was money. That's probably the most expensive steak he ever ate. But he did that. That's the difference. He burned his equipment. He burned the animals. He cooked them. The things that made his life. That's sacrifice. That is true and total sacrifice. So ask yourself this. What bridge or bridges do I need to burn? What things have I been holding on to that are distractions, that prohibit me or hinder me from faithfully and fully following Jesus? Only you can answer that. Only you know. You and the Lord know. I want to throw in a little disclaimer here. I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. It may just very well be the shortest message I've ever preached. But the day is young, so we'll see. Jesus is not talking in terms of salvation, rather in terms of he's teaching about service. For those of us who belong to him, what service are we doing for him? So these individuals may have believed in Jesus, apparently enough to inquire or to entertain this conversation. These individuals may have had their sins forgiven. We don't know much about them. We don't even know their names. Yet they weren't willing to follow him on a daily basis. They weren't willing to surrender their will to his will. Have we become comfortable in our Christianity? Don't answer that out loud. We like Jesus. In fact, we like him a lot. And we sing, oh, how I love Jesus. But are we deeply committed to him? Does it steer the direction of our life from following him? These are questions we have to ask ourselves. Found this quote on the internet, and you're like, oh boy, it's probably an Abraham Lincoln quote. No, I've used that one before. Following Jesus isn't just signing up. It's showing up, surrendering, sacrificing. It'll stretch you, it'll cost you, but it will transform you from the inside out. I like that quote. I agree with that quote. Obedience is so satisfying. We're in this age today. People are like, I like this sound. It's so satisfying. And you go on an app on your phone and you listen to these sounds because it's so satisfying. There's nothing more satisfying than obeying Christ and being in the will of God. The bottom line, you might say, well, that all sounds well and good. Sounds great. But how does it work? Well, discipleship isn't just tacking on some Bible verses to your life. It's not just making your Instagram bio say, I'm a God guy, or I'm a God girl, just to impress the masses. It's spiritual discipline, which involves including Him in all of our thoughts, all of our decisions, all of our plans, and all of our actions. We have to surrender Him daily. We have to allow Him to change our selfish, because we are, by default, we're selfish people. Right? That's what our flesh wants to do. Change our selfish ways into sacrificial obedience to Him. There's a story told about a mischievous young man. He broke into a department store one night, not to steal anything. He was just being bad. And he wanted to switch the price tags on the items. Oh, how I wish they would do that in the grocery store. Please, with the eggs at least. But he sneaks in there. He put a $5 price tag on a $2,000 suit. Hey, I'm signing up for that. And a $2,000 price tag on a $5 pair of sunglasses. He was swapping things around. He swapped the values of genuine jewelry for costume trinkets and high-end electronics. He'd go put them on toys from the bargain bin. Just messing everything up. Didn't steal anything, though. Well, the next morning, the store opened as usual. But chaos prevailed and people went nuts. You know how it is. You shoppers out there on Black Friday. It was this mob mentality here. Shoppers rushed to grab the more expensive items. They look like deals. What a great deal. You'll never find this anywhere else. Others refused to purchase the cheaper items because they're like, that seems like an awfully high cost for those cheap junk things. Very unusually and insanely high. And this is how the world's skewed idea of value tries to redefine discipleship. And we get caught up in this, don't we? We go along with it sometimes. The popular opinion. The true treasures of following Christ are not what the world sees. Self-denial. I mean, who wants that, right? Obedience. No, everybody wants to be their own God and do their own thing. Surrender. Who wants to do that? I want my independence. No. Those things are labeled as too costly. Meanwhile, the cheap thrills, comfort, popularity, and wealth, they're marked as valuable. We see it every day, right? The priority that people place is so messed up. But I thank God for His Word and His honesty to us. He can't lie, and He certainly tells us the truth in His Word. Jesus said, whoever does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. He doesn't mince words. We don't say, what do you think? What do you think Jesus means there? He means what He says, and He says what He means. There has to be sacrifice. He doesn't hide the price tag either. He doesn't say, follow me and you'll never have a worry in the world. He says, follow me, it's probably going to get hard. And then after it gets hard, it's probably going to get harder. But that's okay, because we have Him. If you know anything about ROI, the return on investment, it's a very high return on investment when you think about the spiritual benefits of being obedient and following Christ and being a disciple. Discipleship will cost you something. It's going to probably cost us a lot of things. Pride, comfort, maybe even our plans, our desires. But I love this truth. You will gain something priceless. Fellowship with Christ. A daily walk with Him. His presence accompanies. There's nothing more valuable than that. So we looked at 3 negative things, 3 individuals that didn't quite get it. The last thing, the importance of following. We are all called to be disciples. When we follow Christ, the result is discipleship. We're learning from Him, and then we're passing that on to others so they can learn, and they can learn, and they can learn. Pass the faith along. 3 negatives: disappointment, delay, and distraction. kept these individuals from the one thing that they really needed, discipleship. And we have to deal with the same thing today. We have to make a decision today in our own lives. How are we going to treat this? I know this was written a couple thousand years ago, but the truth pops off the page in our own lives. We have to deal with it. Jesus didn't change the terms and conditions and say, now that was an ancient story, just go and do as you please. No, same thing.